I don't know if you know this as a group. I'm not sure to what extent the story was told, but I dreamt up this idea of creating a math curriculum for schools when my son, who's now 6, was a tiny baby. And I still can visualize walking through the forest in Germany. I dropped off my daughter at school, and every day I used to walk through. I walked the long way home because it gave me that creative space and him a time to sleep. And when I came up with the idea, it was because at that time I felt like schools spent so long writing curriculum and then had no time to focus on the implementation. So we'd gone through the process of writing a maths curriculum, and the next year we were writing literacy, but we weren't focused on the implementation of the maths. And I went, if only there was something that schools could use and then focus on their unit design. So that was how it started. And I went, I know who to reach out to. And I reached out to Kelvin Sparks, and we started this collaboration, just the two of us articulating the understandings, effectively making a scope and sequence. Then we were just about ready to launch that, and we shared it with just a couple of schools, and their feedback was, it's great, we're excited, but we're still not sure how to design the units. And so I went, okay, Kelvin, we've got to write all the units. And he's like, how are we going to do that? And I was like, well, we need more people. But at that point, I still thought we were talking about a 6-month project. And I think we're now 3 years on from that, and we've finally launched that. But when I think about what that means for schools, like, can they do this themselves? When we think about how much time this took from a group of educators around the world who were passionately interested and excited about spending, frankly, hours designing curriculum. And we all know that we don't all have 4 people like that in our grade level who want to spend hours designing curriculum and designing grade level units. So in some ways, that's what I'm most excited about now, being able to get this out into the world so that teachers don't have to focus on scope and sequence, on unit design. They can actually focus on teaching. And my daughter, when she was about 7, said to me, Mum, how do teachers know what to do? And I said, what do you mean? And she said, well, when the teacher's writing something up on the board, how does she know what to write? And I said, I'm not sure what you're asking. And she said, they spend all day with us, Mum. How do they know what they're going to do the next day if they spend all day with us in the classroom? Because in New Zealand schools, there is no release time. The children and the teachers are literally together from the time the day starts till the time the children go home. And I was like, wow, that's really insightful from a child of that age to go, where do teachers find the time?
I was going to say, even if someone wanted to spend that many hours planning for math, the teachers that we're writing for are also the literacy teachers, the science and social studies teachers, the personal, social, pastoral care teachers. So even if you want to, because we were talking about, I was talking about my dislike for programs, but at the same time, the expectation of a teacher to do all of that planning, as what you described sounds like exactly what I live as a curriculum coordinator, writing curriculum over and over again.
And once you get through it all, you just start again.
Instead of focusing on the actual teaching, all that documentation. So maybe something that has this level of, I think I used the word intellect, of understanding, will mean that the teachers then can bring that into the classroom, as opposed to programs which just then have you working on the next page. So that's my hope with this.
And it was never intended to be prescriptive or a script for teachers. We always wrote it as suggested learning engagements. If you want to take this understanding and design different learning engagements, by all means, but use this, as you say, to deepen your understanding of curriculum. So I'm excited. I'm excited about it. So Shanthi, how has this changed the way that you think about mathematics?
I was just sharing with Patrick, I have never done well in maths. I didn't believe I had the brain to do maths, and I didn't do well, and I kind of failed my maths and all that, and I always thought it was because I was just not talented in maths. It was something that you had to be born with, you know. But then going through this process, I realized that all that I needed was somebody to show me these understandings and lead me in the right direction, and I never had that, you know. So there were so many gaps in my understandings, and it was all about procedural maths, and nobody told me why I'm doing this. When I'm doing fractions, nobody explained to me what fractions are. It's like, these are fractions, and this is what you call it, and this is what you do. And going through this process, and I was telling both of them, I realized it was such a fantastic learning opportunity, and it has changed the way I teach maths. It has changed the way I talk about maths. And it has changed the way even I do math, because I was like, this is real life, you know, whatever I'm teaching the kids, I can apply it, you know, I can break this down. And
so it's made you more confident as a teacher?
Absolutely. And then, you know, it's like I just realized that there's no such thing as you can't do math.
Yeah.
And that to me is really, really very powerful.
And you know what will happen as a result for teachers who feel that way?
Yeah.
You'll actually spend more time teaching maths.
I love it now. I used to do a lot of literacy and like just, you know, get through the hour for maths, but now it's like I'm planning, I'm thinking, how am I deepening? And then we were saying that it's all about asking the right questions. And I never had the right questions, and that's such a powerful tool for me as a teacher. And if you ask the right conceptual question, you know, if you do enough concept formation, they will be able to tell you their understanding. And then, so if you keep asking and you're not able to do it, it's like there's something wrong with my question. Or, you know, so I need to go back and tweak my question. Yeah. So it's very, very powerful, and I enjoyed the journey tremendously.
Patrick, how's it changed things for you in terms of how you're teaching maths?
Yeah, well, I've had a kind of a similar experience to you in that I was just telling you, like, I nearly failed my first year of teaching because of my maths teaching, because I had such little understanding. And having gone through school, I was in bottom set because, you know, setting's so good. And so that very much communicated to me the kind of maths person the world clearly thought I was. And so it was through teaching conceptual-based maths that I ended up being the maths coach at my old school and stuff, and learning all this. So I've been on quite the journey, and it's really changed. Even then, now coming in and working on the project, I am changing all sorts of things, like the way I structure my thinking about and understanding, the way I sort of allow the children to navigate through it, and sort of, you know, those moments where you give them the choice and then kind of like, okay, and now it's back in here, and sort of out we go again, and now we're back. It's really changed how I approach my sort of just the whole teaching of it, really. And things like, you know, it never really, and you mentioned earlier today about organizing the thinking. That's a part in maths I'd never thought about. Wait, we need to stop, find patterns across all these and kind of organize our thinking. That's been huge, and that's something I'm really working on at the moment, is bringing in more organization of thinking into just before we generalize. Getting the children to generalize is fantastic. Getting the children, that sounds awful. Having the children generalize, inviting them to generalize. That's been really interesting, and I can see it sparking a change in how the children consider themselves as mathematicians, like the image. Because those children who still, for whatever reason, by grade 5 are not maths people, they really enjoy crafting those generalizations. And I have definitely 2 girls in my class who will craft generalizations all day, and they love it. And it's really wonderful watching them, because they're gaining this understanding around maths, and sometimes they don't have maybe the skills and knowledge yet around those things, but they're kind of getting this understanding, and they're wanting to go back and inquire. It's also been really powerful for me. They're powerful for me as well. Like, I've taught something, they've inquired, we've done all the stuff, and we get to the generalization, then I'm like, no, you haven't got that right now. Right, yeah, which part of this is not landing? Okay, right, let's go back into this, and then we spend some time going back into a concept that isn't, you know, hasn't been fully articulated or understood, and then they come back and they're like, right, are they looking at the generalizations they've written, and then they're like, okay, no, I can see why you knew, Mr. Patrick, that wasn't right, because now we know that, and they go back and redo their generalizations. So it's really brought a whole new kind of spark to my teaching and elevated it all. And I think the children really enjoy it, and they enjoy writing their journal. And then we display them, we look at them, we read them, and it's great.
It's a different way of thinking about assessment, right? To move away from that traditional summative pencil and paper test that we moved away from in other subject areas much earlier, but held on to in maths for so long because we didn't know what else to do. How else can we assess them if we don't, make them all sit and not look at anybody else's paper and do a pencil and paper test? But assessing based on their articulation of a conceptual understanding is a completely different way to think about assessment. And like you say, it provides both summative and formative because you're able to go back and go, oh, I can see they didn't get it. We're not just going to go on to the next unit and you get, 34 out of 50 or whatever. We're actually going to go, why didn't you get it? What do you still need? Let's go back and revisit that. Maybe we need to do some more concept formation, which is pretty powerful.
Or it redefines what it means to get it.
Yeah.
Because I think we are, in your examples and in teachers that I know, this idea that you're either good or not good at math. I even think about our end-of-year assessments that we do. We focus on number because that's how we define if somebody's good or not good in math. And then we have, and what the concept-based focus has done is redefined what it means to be capable in math. And there's the skill of being able to do these things, but that understanding piece allows for a whole different way of thinking, a way of learning that invites, to me, more learners in. It's more inclusive. It values a wider range of skill. Math is also something that can get frenetic because it can start to feel like a race, because speed is part of how we define who's good at it. And when you're pausing to generalize, pausing to think, what have we noticed across all of these investigations that we've made, it slows everybody down and gets everybody back on that, I think, even footing again. It's not about who finished first. It's about thinking deeply about what does this mean and where can I see this elsewhere in the world? So I think it brings that same intellectual conversation into math that we have, like you said, in so many other areas. And I'm not, currently as curriculum coordinator, I'm not in a classroom teaching, so I've been able to go in and borrow classrooms or ask, I'll say, I'm really looking at data right now, so please invite me in when you're doing that so that we can take a look together. So it has really also had a great impact on our conversation. And one of the things that we're doing more of, I brought this up earlier too, is much more often in our math planning bringing student work to the table. Also in that, not just, because you have to look at that, not just the generalizations, but all sorts of student work to have really solid conversations about what is being understood, what isn't, where do we have to go next. And it also aligns, if you've got a team of 3 or 4 teachers on a grade level, it gets them also talking to each other and coming up with it's kind of like the collaboration for the project, talking to each other. What does this really mean? What is it that we hope to see students able to do? What do we want them to be understanding about this? So those conversations are so much better if there's student work in front of us, and that's also come from this.
And that comes back to that, they don't have to plan it. They can talk about it and refine their thinking and have time for those conversations about student learning, because it's been planned and now we've got time to focus on the implementation. I read an article recently that talked about the curriculum lottery, and it was specifically a report on Australian schools. But they talked about this idea that in so many schools it depended on what classroom your child was in and whether that teacher was using Teachers Pay Teachers or Twinkle. Another school leader that I spoke to talked about it as the suitcase curriculum in international schools, where everyone's bringing to maths whatever they've used before, and when you work in a really international school, in one classroom they're getting British maths, in another classroom they're getting American maths, and in another, or Common Core, and in another classroom they're getting New Zealand Numeracy Project, just because that's what teachers bring from their experience. And so this is about creating that for schools and for teachers, but it's also about the learning journey of the student and being able to have an articulated learning journey as we go through the phases, which I'm really excited about. Lisa, what was the process like collaborating with other educators from different parts of the world in designing maths units?
It was fantastic to connect and to bring the different perspectives into it and to read something, because we had the generalizations, the understandings there, read it and hear or see or understand completely different things and have to come to terms with that, or have to shoot questions off to somebody else that's working. I was saying to Shanthi that because you worked in the kindergarten of the same strand that I did the first and second grade, so I was looking at your work and seeing how does that build up to our work, and is it aligned, and then we would have to shoot questions off. So that was, I mean, the ultimate collaboration, which then of course means it takes a really long time. So that's where we would think, oh, we're going to accomplish this during this work session, and at the end of it we would be nowhere near that because of the need to touch base and check in and make sure we understood, and we actually think the wording of this isn't quite the way that it should be.
And if
so
we
that
change this, then we also have
exactly
to change that and that.
Yeah. So it was professionally rich. It was really fun. We had a lot of fun together. But it does show how collaborating results in a higher quality product, but it takes a long time, you know, to work through there. Which
Patrick, I think I'm going to ask you that. I have asked you that.
Ask me another.
He's always happy to talk.
I could, yeah, I am.
I would like to ask you actually about, in some of the units we've used phases, in some of the units we've used grade levels.
Yeah.
What do you think of that? You weren't involved in the decision to do that, but you've been involved in the planning.
I planned one that was number with phases, and I've planned, it was sort of shape and space that was mainly grades, so I've planned those. Yeah, I think that's great, because I was just actually thinking while we were talking before about differentiation, and how teaching the concept does allow for that, because those children who have been sort of drilled in number, if you like, and are sort of very good computers, through this I've got some children and they're coming to me and they're asking their own questions, and that's been quite interesting for them to sort of, that kind of provide your differentiation. I think the more schools do it, I hopefully think you should sort of there should be sort of like more kind of like children sort of together.
Yes, there aren't getting children left behind.
You know, and so to begin with, I suppose, I imagine maybe I would have some children there, or maybe I would kind of have this, but it's just a tweak either side. I think what sits alongside that is the culture and values and beliefs around mathematics. And that, you know, there's kind of like building that maths community, we're all mathematicians, that really positive image of children as themselves as mathematicians. And I think sort of that would help, and sort of that idea of just enjoying the beauty of maths and the joy of maths. I remember the beauty of maths was a phrase our old maths coach used to use, and I'd be like, the what? What do you mean? And now I understand what the beauty of maths is, and I sort of and it's kind of like, if everybody's enjoying that, then it doesn't matter if they're phase 3, 4, whatever. And that also seems to align with PYP, the sort of the idea of the phases there as well.
It's really important to me that it's understood as this is something that's happening in your own classroom, and this is not streaming. We are not sending all of the phase 5 children next door, because that's not supported by research. And when you look at the research around grouping in this way in mathematics, it's really clear that in most cases we shouldn't do it. We should be teaching whole grade level, and there's a but in the research, and it says unless you've got fluid, flexible groups that are being differentiated not by the activity but by the understanding, which is exactly what we've designed this around, that we're differentiating the understanding specifically in number. And it came about because I was thinking about my own experience, well, it wasn't just me, several of us were talking about it and saying, in a kindergarten classroom, there are some children who are not yet counting to 10, and there are some children multiplying. And that is a different level of understanding. And to do justice to that, we need to honour that, because this child who's not yet consistently counting to 10 shouldn't be pushed into addition and subtraction or into something else until you can't add if you can't count. And these children who are multiplying, and I've got a friend whose son is 5 and he's talking about the square root of numbers and to the power of, and he's in kindergarten. And so to be putting him in the same group as a child who is still learning to count isn't helpful or meaningful for either child. And so there was much debate about those decisions. Perhaps it's something we'll continue to debate, but it's something, in actual fact, coming from a New Zealand curriculum background, that was how I was taught to teach maths, was according to the groupings of children. And so when teachers are like, but I'm not sure what it would look like, I'm like, oh, I'm not sure what it would look like to put them all in together. I mean, sometimes we do whole group and we take advantage of low floor, high ceiling problems and mixed ability grouping, but I'm excited for teachers to start exploring.
Yeah, and as always, you've hit the nail on the head, because I'm making assumptions. My classroom is a flexible place, and of course, what happens in your classroom is not always what happens in other classrooms. So I think that's really important, is that flexibleness and not just creating that ceiling for children, because there's never a jump. As I experienced from being in bottom set, there's never a jump up. And you just spend your whole life down there, and that's the real key. So I think that's the power in the phases. It's kind of like you've still got room to bring them up.
Well, also, what we find is that you might have a child who, when it comes to partitioning, has had lots of experience in their family talking about halves and quarters, and might be, quite high up when it comes to partitioning, but still needs some work on number sense, or still needs some work around number operations. And so it's also not you're at this phase, it's the pre-assessments are so important.
I was just going to say, if working with phases puts a lot of importance on quality assessments, and it's a little bit like the idea of not having programs because we want to have us write the perfect curriculum for this group, and then we spend all of our time writing. Working with phases means that teachers really have to know how to properly assess and work with kids who are at different places, not even holistically, but depending on the strand. So that's an important piece, is those pre-assessments that were a part of it, that are a part of it, and then recognizing the philosophy behind it, which is that children will grow in different ways, in different speeds, and we want to make room for all of that. Because in theory, that could happen no matter how you organize your curriculum, but the philosophy behind phases is a much healthier philosophy. It's organized around somebody's learning progression. The philosophy around grades is organized around somebody's age, and that doesn't necessarily go with what you know. Yeah.
And I think around that, there's also, what does it mean to be a mathematician? Because there's AI and things that are happening right now. So what does it mean to be a mathematician? Because those are the human skills that are going to help them succeed. So that idea of being a collaborator, being a problem solver, reasoner, sharing your ideas. I often talk to the children about, at NASA, do you think they went home after the first day and went, well, we didn't get a rocket into space today, so that's done, let's just not bother. No, they went back, and then how did they share their thinking? And while you may be a very good computer in terms of being a mathematician, how are you as a human mathematician? How do you then, explain that to somebody else who doesn't understand? How do you bring them up? How do you work in a team? Because that's what we're going to need to thrive and survive. And so I think that's also very important. And I know a lot of my children who are very good computers, when we start to draw out the maths, which is that visualization is a big thing in the project, they're kind of like, oh, I've never thought about it like this. And so there are ways we can change thinking that aren't just accelerating an idea, that aren't just, you can draw it out, you can reason it. How many ways can you represent this? Because people think differently, and we've got diverse thinking. So how do we reach all these people to help as many people as possible? So I think that's also an important thing around there as well. Not just the understandings, but we're also teaching them to be human beings.
And that collaborative culture
Yeah.
of sharing different ways of understanding and seeing something and representing something.
Doing what we've all done just right now to be successful. So that's important as well. So.
Can I ask you a question?
Please.
About the program that I don't... Is there mathematical processes, or whatever the word is, where we would have evidence-based thinking?
So yes, and yes, but as we were writing the strands, we were really intentional about including process-based understandings embedded. But version 2 does have a plan for an additional strand for process-based understandings that get put into, not a unit that you would do on process-based, but a strand that articulates those mathematical processes.
Because that's another area where I see, if we honor that, which is so important, because those are the mathematical thinkers.
You want to be involved in writing that, but
I do. Well, because those are sometimes learners who aren't the quickest with their computation skills, but they're the thinkers. They know how to find the right resource in the room. They're not happy until they've really figured it out. So that's an important thing to raise up and honor. So that's...
Well, we're excited to get it to this point, to share it with the world, and to get it out there. Well, thank you. And, we'll continue to build. It's from here on to continue to refine it and build it and develop it. So cheers. Thank you.